Okay, so today I want to sort of bring everything that I've talked about away. I mean, not necessarily permanently away, but I want to bring all of the psychological things I've been talking about and the biological things that I've been talking about, and I want to bring that into the realm of mythology, and I want to bring that to the religious, and I want to introduce this idea of God. And then I want to, in the next lecture, I'm going to discuss Christ, and that's going to be the end of the lecture series. So, what have I talked? I've mostly talked about the psychology of this hero's journey, and of course, the hero's journey is based off of a mythological motif that's very commonly portrayed. Um, but I sort of brought it to the psychological level and to the personal level, and I've even talked about some biological things, so some things that are grounded in and scientific truth. But when you get into the realm of the mythological and the religious, there's this notion of God, and so you might say, well, who is God in this hero's journey thing? And so that's what I want to try and explain. And so the hero's journey is a pattern, right? So it doesn't just happen one time in your life. In fact, it happens actually all the time. You know, if you're not completely off the rails, you go through micro heroes journeys all the time. Every single time you learn something new and you accept that thing, you just went through a micro heroes journey. And I believe that that goes down. It goes all the way down to just the perception, just glancing at something, right? Because you're sacrificing everything else, and so really, this hero's journey motif is inevitable, right? It's built into human perception itself, and so that's what I tried to reconcile with the previous courses in the first course. This biological, um, this sort of biological backing for human perception in a sense, and then with the hero's journey, and I tried to bring those two together, and now I'm bringing that into the mythological. Okay, so you have that pattern of the hero. Well, you could say when the hero dies, of course they're gone, but and I mean die like they're literally physically dead, not this death and resurrection type thing. That they're literally dead, and forever, right? And so you could say, well, did they die? And that's complicated. I mean, biologically and physically speaking, yes, they died. Their body's not there, but the pattern that they enacted never dies, and what transformation they made in the world also never dies. And so this is another reason to act out the pattern of the hero, because you're acting out an eternal pattern, right? The pattern of the hero never dies, right? Christ acted it out 2,000 years ago, and it's still well and alive today. And I believe that it will always it'll always be there. Society at large might reject it at times and maybe even forget about it, but they'll rediscover that pattern. And so it never dies, it never changes, right? The pattern of the hero never changes because it's the pattern that when embodied leads to change, right? So it's the process by which we change things, and therefore it's never going to change. And so that's part of its divine nature, of its eternal nature, right? The pattern of the hero never dies. And so in a sense, everybody who acts out the pattern of the hero at large in their lives will also never die because they're acting out an eternal pattern. But that isn't just one reason. Another reason is that what they do has an everlasting effect on the world. And that's really something to know, that every single action you perform is an action that is going to lead to the transformation of the world, and it's that the mark that you leave on the world is a permanent one. Now, I'm not saying that when someone changes something about the world, that change can never be reverted, or a new change cannot occur. But what I'm saying is their actions have transformed the world in a manner in which it won't be forgotten, at least by the world itself. And so I think that's true at large. You can take what people have done, over the entirety of their life. There's people like Charles Darwin, for example. Like, is he dead? Well, I mean, maybe he's dead, but what he's done is still very much alive. And I mean, you can take that with the Apostle Paul, right? I mean, is the Apostle Paul dead? It's like, well, yeah, but we're still reading his letters that he sent to churches 2,000 years after he sent them. And so, in some sense, these people aren't actually dead. They're not actually gone. I mean, they're still there in this weird sense. And that can be both a positive thing, and it can also be a negative thing, because the pattern of the hero is eternal, but the pattern of the adversary is also eternal. And so it's the same thing, where if you act out the pattern of the adversary, you're still transforming the world, or at least you're keeping it at a lesser level than it could have been. And so it's effectively the same thing as transforming it, because there really is no in the middle, right? There's no fence between hero and adversary. I mean, you can be a mix between the two, and I think every single person is. But there's no saying, oh, I'm not going to make a negative impact, but I'm also not going to make a positive impact. There's no saying, oh, I'm going to be neutral my entire life. That's not how it works. You're either going uphill or you're going downhill, whether you want to or not. You're moving in a direction constantly. And if you weren't moving in a direction, then, well, likely things would be worse, because then you wouldn't have a frame of perception, you wouldn't have a goal, and you'd only be left with a negative emotion. So thankfully, you are constantly moving forward, even if you don't know what it is, and even if you've reverted back to your own desires to move you forward. You're constantly moving. And so the question becomes, are you moving uphill or are you moving downhill? And it's a very important question to ask yourself, because there's humility in saying that you're a little bit of the adversary, but there's also hope in seeing that you're a little bit of the hero. And I would say, not only do people embody part of both, but I would say they have the capacity to be, one in the extreme and other in the extreme. So every single person has within them the capability to be the adversary completely. They have the ability to completely embody the adversary, and vice versa. They have the ability to completely embody the hero. And it's actually, I mean, if you think about what the adversary is doing, I mean, when you see movies, right, and you see this hero and adversary thing at play, I like to I like the Batman movie. I think it represents this quite well. You have a clear hero and a clear adversary, and even in the Joker, what you see with him is that he is no ordinary, bad guy, right? So there's a scene where in the Joker, I don't think I've watched it. I've just heard this. There's a scene where he's with some mafia thugs, and they go and, like, they rob a bank or something, and they bring the money back, and I think Joker gets half the money and they get the other half. And the Joker takes his pile of money and throws gasoline on it and lights the whole thing on fire and watches it burn. And the mafia guys are like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! What are you doing?" And it's like, well, the mafia guys, you can understand, right? They're motivated by greed. They want money, and they're willing to do evil for the money, so that they can use that money to buy food, shelter, all those things. But the Joker, he doesn't even care about the money. He doesn't want the money. In fact, he doesn't want anything. He wants everything to be death, destruction, and chaos, complete and utter chaos. Even if it's detrimental to himself, right? He could have used that money to like to I don't know to he could have used it to go fight more crime. He could have used it for food. He could have used it for all these things, but he doesn't even care about any of that. He doesn't even care about his future self. And so the adversary, um, he or she is is against the world. It's the usurping spirit that's trying to destroy the world, but they're also doing it in a manner that is destructive to themselves in the future, and so they don't even care. They're just fully, they're in the moment, but in the worst possible way, right? It's what I want right now. Um, and so Christ says in the New Testament, he says to focus on the moment, but before he says that, and this is extremely important, before he says that, he says, I believe he says, seek first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And then he says, pay very close attention to the moment. So it's see the future goal, see yourself in the future, see the world in the future, and make a vision of what that is, move forward cautiously, and then once you do that, then you can pay maximum attention to the current moment and what's happening. But you have to have that future goal in mind. Otherwise, if you have no future goal and you're paying very close attention to the moment, then what you're effectively doing is just acting on your own impulses. And so and those impulses, let's just say, do not have your best interest at mind. So you have these two patterns, these two very strong patterns that can transform the world in major ways. And these patterns, in a sense, are spirits, right? Because it's like the spirit of the hero and the spirit of the adversary. And they're spirits because they're not you, and maybe they're not even human necessarily. I mean, maybe they're human, but they're not you, right? Everybody doesn't have their own version of the hero's journey. I mean, you everybody maintains the basic framework, otherwise it's not the hero's journey, right? It isn't this pattern that Christ lays out. Um, it all has the same basic framework. Now, of course, people are doing different things, and their version of their ideal self is different. But the framework, the spirit, so to speak, is the same across all people. And so, if it's not you, then it's some form of a spirit, right? Because you're not in control of it. It's in a sense, it's there regardless of you or not. And so then you say, well, the spirit of the hero is real. And then you say, well, I made a whole lecture about hope and truth, and you can say, so the spirit of the hope is real, the spirit of faith is real, the spirit of truth is real, the spirit of love, the spirit of the logos, or the transformative word. And so then you put all of these things in a circle, and you say, so well, what's in the middle of that? And so here's what I mean. I mean, when I say a word, what your brain actually does is it thinks of a cloud of words around that word, and that kind of produces a form of meaning, or at least you can do that. And so if I say like water bottle, what are the things associated with water bottle? Well, of course, you can break it down to water and bottle, and then thirst and um, hydration, and so there's a cloud of words around it. And so if I were to say water bottle, what's a word around that, and you say lamp or book, that wouldn't make any sense, right? Those things have nothing to do with water bottles. And and so when you have the spirits of the good, the spirit of goodness and of the goods, so love, truth, hope, faith, righteousness, the pattern of the hero, all of these things, and you say, well, what spirit is in the middle of that? And I would say that seems to be something approximating God. And so, what is God? Well, God is, in a sense, he seems to reveal himself as the structure of moral reality itself, right? So we see this often, especially in the Old Testament, but we also see this in the New Testament, with Christ in the book of Revelation. We see that God is manifested as a form, as a divine judge or a cosmic judge, and he judges all the people. And so going back to the story of Cain and Abel, God is the judge in that sense because uh, he punishes Cain for not making the ultimate sacrifice and getting jealous of his brother and murdering his brother and killing his ideal. But in all these stories where you see God acting as a judge, the the judgment that he pronounces isn't arbitrary, it's not random, it's in consequence to their actions. And so it's almost like, the structure of reality and God are the same thing, right? And they seem to be the same thing. And I mean the structure of spiritual reality, of moral reality, of mythological reality, of religious reality, those sorts of things. And God's judgment is all of God's judgments are consequences to your actions and inevitable consequences to your actions. And so it's like I have this water bottle here, and if I push the water bottle, it's going to move forward. And so that's you could say that's how the laws of physics work. So I would say that there are spiritual laws or religious laws that are just like that, to where if you push something, then it moves, or if you pull something and then it comes towards you. And so there are these inevitable consequences, to your actions that are psychological, but that can be manifested in the physical. And but God is also the thing. By definition, he is the thing at the top of the hierarchy, or at least beyond the hierarchy, right? So there's a story in the Old Testament in Exodus chapter 3. And it's about Moses. And so Moses, is somewhat of a righteous man. He's a shepherd, and he's living his ordinary life. And whenever he is leading the sheep, probably to go, eat food or drink water or something, he's tending his flock, and he sees in the corner of his eye, he sees a burning bush. But the bush isn't burnt. It's not disappearing. It's not going away, but it's on fire. And so he says, "Oh, well, I must go and inspect this thing." And he goes, and he has this dialogue with God. And whenever he gets closer to the bush, God says, "Wait, take off your shoes, for the land on which you are standing or walking on is holy ground." And so that shoe is emblematic of your identity. So Moses throws away his identity, and he moves forward towards God, and they have a dialogue. And God tells him to go to Pharaoh and to let the Israelites go to the promised land, to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go and worship him in the wilderness. And Moses is like, "No, I'm not really the type of guy to do this." And so he sort of makes up a bunch of excuses. And one of the objections he throws, he says, "Well, suppose I do go, and I go to Pharaoh and I say, 'The Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob,' I believe, he says, 'Let my people go so that they can worship me in the wilderness.' Suppose I do go and say that." And he says, "Well, who is this God that you talk about?" And so Moses is like, "What should I tell them? Like, suppose they ask me for your name. What's your name?" And God says, "No, no, no, no. I don't have a name. I'm not a being. I can't be categorized." Because in ancient Israelite thought, to name something was an expression of dominion over that thing. And so basically, Moses was trying to control God, right? Everything else could be named and subdued, and he finds this weird burning bush, and he's like, "Okay, well, I can name and subdue this too." And God's like, "No, no, 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 no. I don't have a name. I am who I am." And so what does that mean? That means that God cannot be put in a category, or his category is God, right? His category is Yahweh. His category is him, and he is the only one in that category. But I would say that he's beyond human categorization. Because when you're putting something in a category, what you're saying is we understand this and it fits here. But the problem is that we don't understand God because he's beyond being, he's beyond us. He's in the divine, he's in the kingdom of heaven on his throne, right? And so back to this hierarchy idea. So he's at least what's at the top, but maybe even beyond that, right? So he's at least beyond, but maybe even at the top is a better way to say that. And so then the question is, well, if our because when we perceive things and we assign them meaning, we assign more meaning to some things than we do to other things. And so some things are very relevant, some things are a little bit relevant, and some things are irrelevant. And so you can imagine the irrelevant is at the bottom, and at the top is the most relevant, the most important thing, the thing that we're worshiping. And you can imagine it's a value hierarchy, and going up the hierarchy, it increases in value. And so then the question becomes, well, what's at the top? And so maybe you'd say, oh, well, the most important thing to me is my family. And it's like, well, yeah, fair enough. Okay, family. But I mean, is it just your family, or is it this idea of family, right? Because if we're going to have other people adopt that same belief, right? Not everybody's going to place your family at the top of the hierarchy. So they're going to have their own hierarchy, and their family's going to be at the top, and there and there and there and there. And with so all the different people, it's their family. And so then you might say, well, are those different? And it's like, not really. There's something similar there. And so out of all those groups, all those families, you can extract out the pattern, and that is putting the family itself, so just the family as such, at the top. And so then you could say, well, it's the spirit of the family. And then, well, but it's your family, but why is it your family, right? It's because you love them, and they're your people, and they support you. And I mean, maybe you would, but say that your whole family was against you, um, and they were very hostile towards you, and they never wanted to be around you, never wanted to talk to you, and you were isolated away from them. I mean, would you still put family itself, or would you still put your family at the top? And so maybe you would say, well, maybe not. Um, but so what I'm trying to say is that the family that's at the top of that hierarchy is not just your family, but family but family, just in general, just the idea of family. And it's not even just family, it's the ideal family, right? So one of the things, when you fall in love with somebody, you aren't falling in love with their flaws. And so what are you falling in love with? Well, you're falling in love with what's good about them, what you like about them. And you bring that to mind whenever you think about them. You don't, at least if you have a healthy relationship, you don't sit there and ponder on their flaws and inadequacies and their failures. You ponder on their successes. And so whenever you're looking at someone that you like, or that you love, or that you enjoy being around, you're actually seeing that person in their ideal state. And so I think it's the same thing with family, right? When you say, "Oh, my family is the most important thing to me," well, it's not just your family; it's family in general, and it's the ideal version of your family. So it's your family in their best state. And so when you prioritize your family, what you should be doing is trying to make your family better. And maybe that starts with you, and maybe you're the biggest problem, and so it should start with you. But you make that transformation yourself, and then it becomes easier to transform other people and to transform the world. right? One of the things that Christ says in the New Testament, he tells us to go and teach people the commandments of God. But here's what he says specifically. He says, "Do not think that I have come to destroy the law and the prophets, for I have not come to destroy but to fulfill. For very truly I say unto you, not an iota nor the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law and the prophets until all of it is accomplished." And then he says, "Therefore, whoever sets aside the least of these commandments and then teaches others to do accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. So whoever does not do and then teaches others to not do the law is condemned." And then he says, "But whoever does them and then teaches others to do accordingly will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." And then he makes a reference to the Pharisees, who are the religious hypocrites, and um, he says, "Therefore, if your righteousness does not surpass that of the Pharisees and teachers of the law, you will by no means enter into the kingdom of heaven." So he calls them out, right? They're the religious hypocrites who are telling everybody do these commandments, but they themselves are not following the law. And so Christ's point there is act out the law, and then you can judge the world. And so it's this idea of get your own house in order, get yourself in order, and then you can go about reorganizing the world. And so, people sometimes joke about Jordan Peterson saying, "Go make your bed" or "Go clean your room," that might be one of his rules in his book. I'm not sure, but maybe it should be. If it's not, but anyways, there's also, in a strange sense, and going back to the psychological for a second, there's no difference between organizing the physical world around you and reorganizing yourself, right? So there's this idea, I don't know if it was first proposed by Richard Dawkins, but he made reference to it. I'm speaking purely biologically. He said that everything is a microcosm of its environment. And I think he used the example of a bird and an alien. So if you were to give an alien a bird from Earth, hypothetically, he could figure out all sorts of things about Earth's environment. He could figure out the gravitational pull of the Earth due to the way that the bird flies. He could find the temperature of the Earth. By looking at what the bird ate, he can figure out what sorts of foods were available, at least to the bird on Earth. And so you can figure out all sorts of things, and you could probably have a pretty accurate depiction of Earth just by taking one simple animal from it and studying that animal. And I think that's true biologically, but I also think that it's true psychologically. And so if you're psychologically a mess, that's going to manifest itself in the environment around you, right? You're not going to clean your room, you're not going to clean your house, everything is going to be dirty. But if you're a very organized person psychologically, that's going to manifest itself out in the world. And I think the reversal is true. If you're in an environment, or if you, not if you're in an environment, if you make the environment around you more organized, then there's no difference between doing that and organizing yourself psychologically. And so it's very important to clean your room, right? These things are not insignificant. These things are very important because it's the environment that you live in, and your bedroom is a physical manifestation of your psychological state, effectively, right? And so I think that's incredibly true. And so back to this hierarchy idea. What's at the top is effectively God. And so going back to the family example, right? You have your family, and then you have the ideal version of your family, and then you have the spirit of the family, and then you have the spirit of the ideal family. And I would say that the spirit of the ideal family is part and parcel of God's characteristics. Now, he's more than that. And so in a sense, putting your family at the highest possible place um, can actually go terribly wrong, right? And so what you might say, well, um, maybe well, like let's take an instance for example where there's like a I don't know, a zombie I don't know. Gosh, let's say you have a choice, right? You have a choice to make and you have to make a choice or else one of them is going to happen. Or how about this? If you don't make a choice, then both of them happen, right? So the first option is that your family dies, and the second option is that the entire rest of the world dies. And so you have to make that choice, otherwise both die, right? And so which would you choose? And so well, I would hope that it would be the entire world, because if it was just your family, then you would have the problem of incest and all that, all those problems that go along with it. Of course, there's um, your family. There might not be that many people in your family, at least not 8 billion people, and so there would be a higher chance that the human species doesn't live on. And so, of course, that's a crazy hypothetical, but you can see how, in some circumstances, the world at large is more important than your family. Oh, okay. So I mean, I'm sure you can see that, and so there are some instances where your family needs to be subordinated, it needs to be moved down the hierarchy, and something else has to replace it. And so, what is that something else? Well, it's the world, but again, the world, it's life, it's human life, right? It's a human life. And then of course you have your family, and then subjugated at least somewhere below that would be like something like plant life and animal life, and all those things. And so um then you say, well, what exactly is it that you're placing above your family? And you could say, well, it's the world, but it's not just the world. It's the ideal version of the world, and it's the spirit of the world. So it's the spirit of life. And so that you can see clearly how that's also a manifestation of God, right? God is the spirit of the family, but at a higher level of abstraction, he's the spirit of life itself. And so, and I'm sure you can keep going up there, and then you would just get to something approximating God, anyways. But these spirits are characteristics of God, right? God is the spirit that brings about. He's the process, the spirit, the mechanism by which the ideal family is brought about and the ideal world is brought about. And so he's the spirit of the hero in that sense, right? Because the hero is the one that establishes um, a good world. And so okay, and so that's the pattern of the hero, and that's where God comes into all of this, right? God is he's these spirits that never die, that are placed at the top of the value hierarchy, that are beyond the things which they represent. So the spirit of life is beyond life itself. The spirit of family is beyond family, especially beyond your family itself, because these spirits are not the things themselves, because they are the processes or the mechanisms by which these things are established. And so the spirit of truth is the mechanism by which the truth is established. And the spirit of love is the mechanism by which people love. It's not love itself, it's the way in which people love. And so it's the spiritual manifestation of these things that supersede the things themselves. And so again, God's not a being, right? God isn't love. I know the Bible says God is love, but that's not what it means. The Bible isn't saying that God is a chemical reaction in your brain. That's not what he's saying. Chemical reaction in your brain, to be a reductionist. What he's saying is that God is the spirit of love. So God is beyond love, right? So he's not love itself. Well, he's love itself. Love itself as in beyond it. He's the spirit of it. And so God isn't a being, right? He doesn't have a name. He can't be subdued. Um and and he's beyond being. He's beyond existence too. It's this weird thing, um, where you can't prove the existence of God, at least scientifically speaking, because God is not a being. He's not a materially observed phenomenon necessarily, right? And so the evidence for God is not found in scientific fact, but in experiencing, um, in experiencing the moral and mythological world. And when you delve into that, you seem to when you go to the top of that hierarchy, of that value hierarchy, that's the mythological world, you seem to find something approximating God if what's at the top of the hierarchy is genuinely what should be there. And if it's genuinely the highest possible thing that you can serve. And so that's the question. Well, what is the highest possible thing that you can serve? And that seems to be God, but more specifically, what is it, right? And so you have life, you have the universe as a whole. I mean, you have the universe, but then you have the process by which the universe is brought about. And the process by which the universe is brought about is higher in the value hierarchy, or at least it should be higher than the cosmos itself. And so, what's the spirit that gave rise to the cosmos? Well, that's the injunction in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, is that God is that spirit. And so what that means is at least one manifestation of God that should be worshipped as the highest, or at least in at least very high up the hierarchy, is the spirit that gave rise to the cosmos itself. And so that's where God fits in. And so now I want to talk about bearing your cross. Right? So that's what Christ in the New Testament, Christ calls us to bear our cross. And and what that means is that we are called to take upon our shoulders the very sins of the world itself. So all the flaws of the world, all the potential for transformation, we are to take that and place it on our shoulders and walk uphill, and thereby transform the world into what it could be. And then so so another way to say that is to bring forth what is within you. And that's what supposedly Christ says in the Gospel of Thomas. He says, if you bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you. And if you don't bring forth what's within you, then what is within you will condemn you. And that's it's sort of implied by Christ, although not in the same way. Christ tells a parable of these three people, and so I'm telling this parable again. There's one person who has 5 bags of gold, one who has two, and then one who has one. And the two people who have the 5 bags of gold and the 2 bags of gold, they go and they double theirs. So the one that had five now has 10, and the one that has two now has four. And both of them are rewarded by their master. But the one who has two comes to his master, and he says, I know you're a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and so I didn't want to lose this money, right? I didn't want to I didn't want to sacrifice it because I thought that something bad might happen to it, and so I went and I hid it in the ground. I hid it within me. I kept it down low in my soul, in the depths. And the master says, you wicked and lazy servant, and he cast him out into the place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so, what that parable ultimately means is that we need to bring forth what's within us. Now, whether bringing forth what's within us will save us, that's a different question, although I think it has at least some truth to it, and maybe even a lot of truth to it. Because to bring forth what's within you is to sacrifice being critiqued for that. So, I was watching a Jordan Peterson lecture today, his "We Who Wrestle with God" and the Image of God lecture, and he was talking about how he was a college professor, and he would have his students write essays over what he was discussing. Um, and he said that he would get the essay, and it'd be 95% rubbish, 95% completely useless, cliches and um, second order thoughts, or just outright plagiarism. But he says that like 5%, right, there'd be a few lines on the essay that would be a genuine thought from them. So there'd be a few lines where they genuinely sneak in something that's within them. So they bring out a little bit of what's within them in the hopes that he'll see it and that he'll praise it. And then he says, then the next page would be way more, and then way more, and then eventually it would be mostly that. And so it only took a few essays for these people to realize that bringing forth what's within them is going to lead to them being rewarded, at least if they're right. And now the reason that they wouldn't do that is because, of course, there's the fear that if they say something that the professor doesn't agree with, then they'll get a lower grade. And if they just say a whole bunch of stuff that the professor already said, and just rephrase it a little bit or whatever, and it's all in agreement with him, then they'll get a higher grade. And so they just do that. But the problem is that they aren't following the truth, right? They're not bringing forth what's within them, or they're not saying genuinely what they think to be true. And there's a huge problem with that. And the problem is that if you continuously lie to yourself or lie to other people, and you don't bring forth what's within you, then what you are going to bring forth is something approximating a hell on earth, right? At least some form of hell on earth. And so one of the spirits that should be very close to the top of the hierarchy, and it's a spirit of God, it's a manifestation of God, and even of Christ, right? Christ says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. And so the way, right, that's the straight and narrow path. That's the uphill towards the kingdom of heaven. The truth, right? Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And then the life, right? So that's that idea of you have your family, the ideal of your family, the spirit of the ideal family, and then the spirit of life in its ideal state, right? And so I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. That way, truth, and life, they're all at the top there. And they're all manifestations of God Himself. And so the last thing I'd like to talk about is Christ's statement at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. I believe this is the only gospel that has this statement. Not sure if that's true though. And so Christ is about to go up into heaven. He's about to ascend, and this is what Christ says to them. Then Jesus, this is Matthew 28, verse 18. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. And so, firstly, Christ's calling there is a calling to go and teach all nations. And even before that, I'll discuss this. Christ says, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. And he says that before he resurrects into eternal life, into the kingdom of heaven. And so, the authority of Christ is a very strange thing. And one of the reasons that we can know that Christ is God, right? He's at the top of that hierarchy. He's the thing that is ultimate and beyond being itself, is because He is the ideal human being, right? And so we're constantly moving to an ideal, and you could say, well, what's the ultimate ideal? And you could say, well, shouldn't that ultimate ideal be worshipped? And I think it should be worshipped because Christ is the embodiment of the ultimate ideal of a human being. He is the perfect human being. And so in that sense, he's God, right? He supersedes all of us because we ourselves, at least on our own, we cannot become God, right? We cannot become perfect, and we cannot perfectly embody the Spirit of Christ. And so we need him to aid us along there, along the path. And then again, Christ says, he says, go to the nations and command them to do what I have commanded you to do. So there's that insistence there. I have spoken to you, I've taught you, I've commanded you, and then hypothetically they've been following those commandments. And after they've been commanded, that's when Christ says, "Go and command the nations." Right? So it's again this idea of clean your own house and then go and teach others how to clean their houses, or then go and clean the world. And you sort of need that too, right? Because there's also a sense of arrogance and pride in going about and trying to reorganize the world if you haven't cleaned your own room. Because firstly, what you're saying is that you can do it, and secondly, what you're saying is that you're the one that should do it. And so like you're kind of saying I'm beyond needing to clean my own room, right? I'm above that. But then the question is like, well, if you were truly above that, then why haven't you done it, right? And so that's a funny question to ask yourself. And so you need to be poor in spirit. You need to be humble enough to go and clean your own room, to follow the commandments first, to obey God, and then to go and teach others to do accordingly. And so, of course, I'm making this course, and I'm effectively teaching you how to live your life, and I have to a degree, embodied the spirit of Christ. Maybe not as much as I can bear, but I've attempted to do that, and I've seen that it works. Right? I'm not saying that I'm perfect and that you know that I'm good enough to command you. What I am saying is that I know this works. Right? I know this works, um, and it works beautifully well. And then Christ ends off with this statement. He says, "I am with you always, even unto the end of the age." And that brings real peace on us. But it also reveals us to something. That reveals us something, right? I've been speaking about this hero's journey, and I made reference in previous lectures to the need that to the fact that you shouldn't be doing this alone, and that the ideal adventure is a romantic adventure with a partner, and maybe even with friends, and with the world. Right, the more people that you have by your side who are genuinely seeking your best interest, that have your best interest at mind and have the best interest of themselves and of the world at mind, and who are genuinely trying to make a positive transformation in the world, the more of those people you have around you, the better. And that is very important. But there's also this insistence that it isn't you, right? It's not you that is the pattern of the hero, but it's that pattern of the hero manifesting itself within you. And so it's kind of like you take an animal, and like the difference between an animal and a human being isn't necessarily like it's not necessarily them, although it kind of is them, although that's complicated. But it's more like the difference between an animal and a human being is that spirits are able to, you could use the word possess, at least and the demonic sense, but these divine spirits are dwelling within mankind. And I would say positive and negative spirits can dwell within mankind and bring about a transformation in their lives. And so In this sense, you aren't the pattern of the hero, but you're acting it out, and that pattern is actually with you and it's insisting you. And so Christ's insistence is that he's with us. And there's also in the book of Acts, there is a proclamation, I think, by Christ himself, where he says, I think it's an addition, I don't think it's in the Gospels. Christ says, where two or three gather in my name, there I am with them. And that's very good to know. And what that means is that when you aren't doing things alone and you're doing them with other people, so again it's this insistence that you should not be doing things alone, but that um you should be going on the adventure of your life with other people who have your best interest in mind, who are gathering in the name of Christ. That when that occurs, and it's necessary that occurs, Christ is with them, right? So when two or three or more people gather with the goal of bringing about something approximating the kingdom of heaven, of embodying the spirit of positive transformation, then the spirit of positive transformation is with them. And it's like, of course that makes sense, right? Where two or three or more gather in the name of Christ, there Christ is with them. And of course that's true. And so that's a fundamental claim of Christ. For I am with you always, even unto the end of the earth. Okay, that'll do it for this lecture. The next lectures will be the last that I'm going to do this time around. I actually plan on, um, remaking this lecture sometime in the future whenever I've learned some more and I'm able to provide some more information. Um, I don't know when it's going to happen, probably a few years from now. I don't imagine that it'll be any time particularly soon. And so the next lecture, I'm going to be speaking purely about Christ, or at least that's going to be the framework of the lecture. I'll be going through the Gospels at a high what we say at a high level of abstraction. I'm not going to go into too much depth about it, and so that will be the next lecture.